When we come to the end of a year, typically people do a lot of evaluation, like what occurred in the year 2012? What was the good? What was the bad? What was the ugly? And then shortly after that, we start thinking about the new year, 2013, a brand new year. I must admit to you that when I was a child, I never comprehended living past the turn of the century. I kept thinking I'll be an old man when the year 2000 comes. And now here it is, headed toward 2013. And the really good thing is that we finally discovered that the Mayans didn't know more than God. But as we go through the process, you say, how would we evaluate? What would we look at? What would we go from here? I want to read some passages from Isaiah that at the outset may not sound very encouraging. I apologize for that, but you must understand there's a difference in a prophet and a pastor and an evangelist. A pastor is a fellow with a heart like John Hazlett who just loves people and is always involved in their lives. And when you turn around because you have some need, the pastor is there. There are male pastors. In that sense, there are also female pastors, as you would imagine. And people love people with pastoral hearts. Then there are people who are evangelists. People like, I don't know if you've ever heard of my friend Jeff Walling, but Jeff's an evangelist. He has the ability to stand in front of an audience, no matter how small, no matter how large. It makes no difference in the way he presents, by the way. And he presents the good news. That's what evangelism is, actually. It's presenting the good news. And he does it in such a way as to lead many, many people to Jesus because they hear the good news in a way that just touches them. And then there's the prophet. You see, people love the pastors, they enjoy the evangelist, and they kill the prophets. Because the prophets are the ones who come along and say, I care about you, but I don't have the heart of an evangelist. I would like to give you the good news. I'm sorry, I don't have the heart of a pastor. I want to give you the good news, but I'm not maybe such a good evangelist because what I really am is a prophet. And a prophet is one who is called on to say, this is what's right, and this is what's wrong. And if you do those things that are right, these are the consequences. If you do those things that are wrong, these are the consequences. And I don't care who the individual is, if it's you or me or anybody else, none of us enjoys hearing about the things that we do wrong. Am I correct about that? I mean, I assume that on some occasion in your life you have been chastised or corrected. Would that be valid? And whenever that happens for me, and it still does, and whenever that happens for me, it's never something I enjoy, like, oh, goody, tell me what else I messed up. I really want to hear this. It can be quite painful. And so people typically do not like prophets. They tolerate them at least for a while, and either they yield to the message the prophet gives or they kill the prophet for giving the message, one or the other. Now, Isaiah is a prophet, not a pastor, not an evangelist. Therefore, when you read the book of Isaiah, you don't read it thinking about those other two hearts, or other mindsets, those other two gift sets, even if you will. You read understanding that you're listening to a prophet. Now, gentlemen, put up 6th chapter of Isaiah, if you will. We're just going to read through this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining it. We've got some place where we're headed, but I want to start here. Isaiah is writing this. He says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord, high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Now, we would understand, by the way, since no man has actually seen God, according to what the Bible says, that this is a manifestation of God, a representation of God. So this is what he's seeing, a way that God decides to reveal himself to Isaiah. The next verse says, above him were seraphim, each had 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces. That would be because they're in the presence of God. With the 2 they covered their feet. If you've been to that part of the world over there, and in other parts of the Far East even, you know that showing the bottom of a foot is considered to be a sign of disrespect. I once was in Thailand. I stepped over a little fence, and the missionary said, don't ever do that again. You showed the bottom of your foot. That shows disrespect to anybody who sees it. They covered their feet as a sign of respect, and with 2, they were flying. And they were calling to one another, holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the next verse says, at the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke, indicating that we are now in the presence of something that's mighty, more powerful than ourselves. And that presence is being made known by the physical manifestations around us. And here's what Isaiah says when he realizes he's in the presence of God. Woe to me, I cried. I'm ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, And I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. I think, by the way, that's how any of us would react if we realized that we were in the presence of a direct manifestation of God himself. It is not something that exalts us. It would always be something that would humiliate us. I do not have the right to be in your presence. I cannot even deserve to have you look at me, much less to try to look at you. And he was scared, as would I be. Several years ago, I was walking around the building called the Rotunda, which is on the campus of Faulkner University, and it's actually a round building, so you can actually walk all the way around it in the hall. And a lady stopped me, and Elizabeth Wright was her name, and Elizabeth was always known for being a very direct person. She said, "People say that God talks to you in an audible voice. Is that true?" And my response was, "I'm still here, therefore no, that is not true." Because if I heard the voice of God, I think I would have a heart attack and die. I would be so amazed at the power of God. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand. If you've ever seen a fire, you know what a live coal is. A live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it, he touched my mouth and said, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for." What he did was something symbolic to say, yes, you are in the presence of God. It makes sense that you're humiliated. It makes sense that you're afraid. But I have cleansed you. You are okay to be in the presence of God. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I. Send me." Now, before we read the next passage, I want you to stop just for that one for a second. Think about it. If you were in the presence of God, if you, even in a vision, if in some way God was manifesting his presence in your sight, and then God said, "I'm looking for somebody to go give a message," would you look for somebody else? Would you say, "Obviously you don't mean me, Lord"? Well, you're the only one there. And when he's asking that question, I would think that if you had any kind of a heart to want to serve God, the response would be, "Lord, here I am," or "Here am I," as he would say it. "Here I am, send me." But you see, what the prophet didn't ask was, to do what? What's the message you want me to give? He volunteers to give it because it's obvious that God wants him to do it, and therefore he says he will. But what we're about to find out is the message that God is going to give him is a bad one. One that Isaiah, I don't think anyone, even with a prophet's heart, a prophet's spirit, a prophet's calling, would want to tell people. Here's what God says. He says, "Go and tell this to the people. Be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving." What? Tell them, I want them to listen, but I don't want them to understand. I want them to see, but I don't want them to comprehend. What? So that's what he says tell them. Now, beginning in this next verse, verse 10, he says why he wants them to tell them that. He says, "Make the heart of this people calloused. Make their ears dull and close their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed." Now, have you followed this so far? He said, tell them to ignore me, even though they hear me. Why? Because if they really listened, they would change. I don't want them to change. I want what you do to callous their hearts even more. I don't want them to understand. What? Look at the next. Then I said, I think I would too if I had been there. Okay, God, if that's what you want, you're God. You get to pick. You choose what I do. How long? How long do you want them to be callous? How long do you want them to hear without hearing and see without seeing? How long, O Lord? And he answered, until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitant, until the houses are left deserted and the fields ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone far away and the land is utterly forsaken. What? I want them to ignore me until I bring about this great punishment on them. What? Look at the next verse. And though a tenth remains in the land, it will again be laid waste. But as the terebinth and oak leave stumps when they are cut down, so the holy seed will be the stump in the land. Let me see if I can explain that. When we had our home in Augusta, Georgia, before we moved up here, we had a lot of trees on our lot, and one large oak tree appeared to be dead. And so we cut it down. It was a big tree. We left the stump because getting the stump out was going to take a lot more effort, you understand. First of all, we were in the city limits of Martinez, Georgia. Other places in the world it would be Martinez, but Martinez, Georgia. And for some reason, they had some kind of a thing about using dynamite within the city limits. So we couldn't blow the stump out. There were people you could pay to come in with a machine that would dig the stump out, but that cost a lot of money. And I'm thinking, no big deal. If you just leave it long enough, it'll just rot. And that's cheap. Interestingly, it didn't. That tree that appeared to be dead, and apparently by all signs it was dead, that we cut down, and we chopped into firewood and that we used in the fireplace, which was also pretty cool. The next year began to grow again, not from that big stump, but from within that stump. A little limb came up and began to flourish, and then another. And it was like, this thing's going to grow back. Look at this. It will take 100 years to get as big as it was, but it's going to grow back. Fascinating. All of that, by the way, was prediction from Isaiah as to what was going to happen to the people of Israel. You see, the kingdom had already divided. The northern kingdom was called Israel. The southern kingdom was called Judah. The northern kingdom had 10 of the 12 tribes. The southern kingdom had 2 of the tribes. They had divided, believe it or not, at least initially, over taxes. And now that they were divided, the northern kingdom had been conquered. The southern kingdom was about to be conquered, and they're going to be carried away into captivity in Babylon. It's being predicted by Isaiah that this is coming. And God is making it clear that the reason it is coming is because of the way that the people are. The fact that they've calloused their hearts to me. You say, but he says here that he wants their hearts calloused. If you understand the object lesson here, what he's saying is they are this way. They will continue to be this way. And so actually he's using sort of a sarcasm, if you'll allow me to use that word, to explain what it is. Because if you go all the way over toward the end of the book, chapter 58, gentlemen, let's go there. Isaiah chapter 58, we'll see that they really could have changed. Shout it aloud, do not hold back. This is God again speaking to Isaiah. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion, and to the descendants of Jacob their sins. They typically don't call on the pastor to do that, nor the evangelist. That's typically the job of the prophet. For day after day, they seek me out. Catch this next thing. They seem eager to know my ways, as if they were a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken the commands of its God. Do you see what he said? They seem eager to know my ways. But the next part of the sentence lets you know that they really aren't. You see, he said they want to know my ways as if they were a nation that does what's right and has not forsaken the commands of God. But since they were a nation that was not doing what was right, and they had forsaken the commands of God, while they seemed to be seeking him, in actuality, they were not. They asked me for just decisions and seem eager for God to come near them. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen it? Fasting, by the way, was, among other things, a way to augment power of prayer. Fasting had several reasons. Someday we'll talk about it after I lose some weight. But there are many things involved in the fasting process, one of which was to augment the power of prayer, because in the fasting process, they were denying themselves. They were denying their own desires, their own flesh, which would give more power to their prayers, because then we were concentrating on God as their sustenance rather than food as their sustenance. And so they say, why have we fasted and you've not seen it? In other words, we've done these things that should make our prayers more effective, but nothing's happening. Why have you not noticed what we're doing? Why have we humbled ourselves and you have not noticed? Yet on the day of your fasting, God says, you do as you please and exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife and in striking each other with wicked fist. He's probably exaggerating this just a little. I doubt that every fast ended in a fist fight. But he's making a point here, and he's making it very vividly. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. What? Yes, you're doing your religious actions, and you're expecting me to reciprocate. You're expecting me to respond. But the way you're doing it, I will not respond to positively. You can't keep doing it like you're doing it now and expect me to respond to you. Is this the kind of fast I've chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Sackcloth, by the way, would be, anybody grew up in the country in the old days, anybody know what a croaker sack is? Burlap. It's rough, it's tough. You wouldn't want to make your clothes out of that. It would be quite irritating. This is basically what he's talking about, that you have made clothes that irritate you. Why would people make clothes that irritate them? To remind them of how they were sinful. And so they would cover themselves with the ashes from the fire, and they'd be in the sackcloth. It was a way to humble themselves and say, I'm in low estate. Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast? A day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this kind of fasting I've chosen. To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. Now, he just explained the difference in a religious act and what lies in what God really expects of us. You can fast. You can even put on the sackcloth, you can cover yourselves in ashes, and that may look very religious. But I never intended it to be just an act that was a religious act. What I intended was something that would change your heart, where that you would quit thinking about yourself, you would quit filling your own belly. And when you quit thinking about yourself, you start thinking about other people. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them. Now again, he speaks a little bit in an exaggeration to make his point. Very few people are running around the country completely naked. But what he's saying is they don't have what they need to have. And so if you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood. By the way, this was a reference to the fact that they weren't treating their parents well, and they weren't taking care of their own kinfolks like they should have. Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here am I. Okay, let's tie those chapters together then. You see, in chapter 6, he gives Isaiah a vision of heaven. And as he manifests himself in that vision, Isaiah's afraid. I know I'm an unclean man. Unclean lips, living in a nation full of people with unclean lips. I'm a sinner, and I'm surrounded by sinners. God says, I'll cleanse you. But I need you to do something for me. Great God, what is it? Here I am. I will do what you want. It's interesting that in chapter 58, God uses the same phraseology. You see, just like when Isaiah stood before God and said, here am I, meaning, without reservation, I will do what you want. If you want to send me, I'll go. If you tell me what to say, I'll say it. I will do whatever you wish me to do. Here am I. That was Isaiah at the beginning of the book. Now here at the end of the book, and God saying, here am I. What? You see, I've always been available. But we fasted and you didn't pay attention. We prayed and you didn't answer. That's right, he said. Because you see, you are the people of the calloused heart. We're not calloused. Can you not see our acts of religiosity? I see your acts of religiosity. What I don't see is you're sacrificing what you want to take care of people who don't have what they need. That's what I see. And until you become so selfless as to quit thinking about what you want and thinking it's okay because you are religious, when you finally start looking to the people who have those real needs and you go and fulfill those needs, if they're hungry, you feed them. If they're naked, and again, that doesn't mean they have no clothes. It means they don't have the right clothes or enough clothes. If they have need, then you clothe them. He doesn't have to give a long list of things that people need. If God just gave a list of all the things that human beings need, our Bible would be 6 times thicker than it is just in that section, don't you think? You say, but we're in America. People in our country really don't have needs. I would think that is in every culture. If we just back to what I started, we need pastors, people like John and Carolyn and many others. I'm not just saying that the only ones here. Others, Bill Klein and his wife, people in this church who have this great pastoral heart, who just gravitate toward people who are in pain. They're there. They know what to do. They know what to say. It's just the gift they have. That need will always exist. Yet God didn't call us all to be pastors. The evangelists, the ones who can stand in a pulpit or on a street corner or in an amphitheater or maybe on the television, I don't know. And they can preach the good news in such a way that people understand it, comprehend it, and listen to it and obey it. What a great gift to have. And the prophets that we will never like, who will have the guts. I'm sorry, that's not a polite word to use in the pulpit. The intestinal fortitude to say this is what's right and this is what's wrong. There will ever be a perfect pastor, nor will there ever be a perfect evangelist, nor will there ever be a perfect prophet. You understand that if we wait until we look at ourselves and say, then I have my act together, then none of us will ever do anything, because none of us will ever be perfect. Even the prophet that God called, Isaiah, was well aware of his own sinfulness to the point that he would say, I don't have a right to even be here. And God's response is, basically, that's correct. But I cleanse and I call. Sometimes people ask the question, well, how do you know what you're called to? A lady died 3 or 4 years ago. Her name was Jean Welch. Lived in the city of Montgomery, Alabama, married to a fellow by the name of Ed Welch, who died just a little over a year ago, as a matter of fact. Very godly people. Very strong personalities, did a whole lot of good in their lifetimes, a whole lot of good. Neither was perfect. Both are in heaven now, I'm quite convinced. Neither was perfect, but did a lot of good. I remember many years ago in a conversation where Jean was president, and Jean, by the way, had more of the heart of a prophet than of a pastor or an evangelist, you must understand. And I looked at her and said, how does a person know when they are called to do something? What is your opinion on that? What she said, I think, was the right answer. I can't prove it, but I think it's correct. She said, I think a calling is what happens when there is something on your heart that you cannot get away from, that you just have to go back to it, that when you try to do something else, you have no peace, you have no comfort. You just keep being drawn back to that. That is what you're supposed to do. There's a passage in the Old Testament where it says that God gives us the desire of our hearts. I think that we have typically taken that passage to say, God will give me what I want. Is it possible that a passage like that may not be referring to God being a celestial Santa, but that God will place a desire within us? That God will give us the desire of our heart might mean God will place desires in our heart. God will give us the calling. So that for David Estes, it's in his bride. These are teens who need guidance. We're called to that. And that when that calling comes, for some it would be in one area, for some it would be in another, because there are so many different needs, that if it indeed is a calling of God, it would appear to me that it would be something that would then serve people in God's name and for God's sake. If I feel that my calling is to be filthy rich for the sake of being filthy rich, it may be a desire I have, but I wouldn't think that desire necessarily comes from God. Do you understand? On the other hand, there are people that God has definitely given the ability, the gift to make money. And then they take that money and do marvelous things with it. The Ed Welch fellow I just referred to a few minutes ago made a massive amount of money in his lifetime and gave a massive amount of money away. He had a gift not just for making the money, he had a gift for knowing when to give the money and when not to give the money, to whom to give the money and to whom not to give the money. He would talk about it sometimes on occasion when I would ask him questions. He would say, if I give money to that, it's going to do more harm than good, because then they're going to have somebody else doing it for them. These people need to do that for themselves. They don't need to be delivered. But this over here, they'll never have the money and they can't do it for themselves, so I need to give the money there. He was the one who made the famous comment, you know, anytime I give away $100,000, I find myself looking to see where it's coming back from threefold. Because every time I give away money like that, God gives me more. And I thought, $100,000? Oh, the greatest was when he told me that he gave $100,000 to one ministry, but I should not tell his wife, because she didn't like that particular ministry. And I thought how cool it would be that you could give away $100,000 and your wife not know. That's a lot of money. And this was 30 years ago, so that was a lot of money as opposed to the inflation. You follow my point. So when people say, what is it I'm supposed to do? My first statement is, what's the craving within you? What's the desire in your heart? And then if there is something there, if God has placed that within you, then the next thing has to be, how does that serve God? If it doesn't serve God by somehow serving people, then it may be a calling, but not necessarily from God on high. It may come within your own self. You understand? Because if God called you to something, it will bless people. Oh, and here's another thing. The fact that you're called toward a certain ministry does not necessarily indicate what role you're supposed to play in that ministry. God also gifts people. Now, there's a gift listing in Romans. There's a gift listing in 1 Corinthians. Let me take 5 minutes to explain this, or 3 minutes if I may. You must understand that having a Bible in this form didn't come about for a long time. That for the churches in the New Testament, there was a letter. Like Paul would write a letter to the Romans, and then they would copy it. But they didn't have a copying machine, which meant that somebody had to literally sit down and copy it. And so there weren't that many copies, and it was a tedious process. And then they would send that off to other people. And so not all the churches had all the letters. Now, we have the letter to the Romans, and we have the letter to the Corinthians, 2 letters to the Corinthians in our Bible. There's a gift listing to the Romans. There's a gift listing to the Corinthians. And what we Americans have done is we look at that and go, oh, we'll just combine the list. And that then is the list of all the spiritual gifts. They couldn't do that back then, so that's not the way that was meant to be done. You see, the gift listing in Romans is similar, but not identical to the one in Corinthians. Why? Because as with most lists, not all, but most lists that God gives in the Bible, they were never intended to be exhaustive or definitive. They were intended to be samples. Things like, therefore, there were some gifts that God gives people that you won't find in those lists, but they're definitely gifts of God. For example, we know that they sang in the first century. It's probably different than ours. There was no full part harmony, apparently, and it was more like chanting than singing, but somebody had to write those. We know in the Old Testament, some of those songs were written by people that God directly gave the Holy Spirit to write those psalms or songs. Did that go away by the first century? No, there were people in the first century who would still be inspired by God to write those songs or Psalms, just not in the same way as the book of Psalms, but they had a gift from God to do so. Yet you're not going to find it in those lists because the list was never intended to be exhaustive or definitive. It was just a sampling. Oh, and there are gift sets that God give people today, that God will give people today and does give people today, that wouldn't be in our Bible because those opportunities didn't exist by then. I mean, for example, a graphic artist gifted by God to be so would not have been quite so important in the first century as it would be in the 21st century. Do you understand? Or a person who understands binary code, how those ones and zeros all fit together to make that stupid computer work, and can write programming language. You say, are there some people who are just gifted at that? There are some people who are just gifted at that. Anybody tried that game that's supposed to help us from keeping Alzheimer's? Is it called Sudoku? What, it starts with an S. How's it pronounced? Sudoku? You see, that's why I can't do it. I can't even pronounce it. I get to the easy ones and have trouble. My friend Jeff says, if it's not hard, I don't even do it. Why? He says, I just see the patterns. They're just there for me. I'm glad they exist for you. Not my gift set. But hey, give me a crossword puzzle. I'm a word guy, not a number guy. On and on and on it goes. You say, what's your point? My point is, I've actually been to churches where they took the listings from Romans and took the ones from Corinthians and put together a profile, and they said, okay, the gift of hospitality is mentioned there. People with the gift of hospitality would like to do A, B, C, and D. Do you like to do A? Yes. B? C? D? You have the gift of hospitality. Hogwash. All that indicates is that you would like to have the gift of hospitality. Because there are some people who think they have the gift of preaching. Have you heard those people? Or have the gift of singing. Have you ever watched the tryouts on American Idol? Where they get up in front of those judges, shebang, shebang. And the judges go, you can't sing. My mama says I can. My friends say I can. I have heard myself in the shower. I can sing. It's not your gift. You may like to sing, but God hasn't given you that gift. Some people want to preach, but God has not given them that gift. Have you been in those audiences? Somebody just said, right now. If you have a gift, it will be affirmed by those other than the people who just love you and want to make you feel good. It doesn't mean everybody will affirm it. You understand? Even if you're the most gifted person in the world in some area, there will be some people who will be quite convinced you have not the gift at all. You do understand that. But no one should be teaching unless God gave him or her the gift to teach. Nobody should be preaching unless God gave him or her the gift to preach. Nobody should be leading our singing unless God has given him or her that gift to do so. Are you following my point here? So it's not just the fact that I have a craving or feel like I have a calling. It's now, okay, if it will serve God, what role do I play is determined by the gifts God gave me. So I can still be involved in that calling, but I may not be involved in that particular aspect of that calling because it's not the gift that God chose to give me. If God had given me the choice, I would have chosen singing, because nobody ever says to the speaker, do that one again. You can sing the same song 1,000 times and people will love you. Try that preaching sermons. Just doesn't work. Plus, I think singing has more power. To at least me it does. Music touches me more than anything else. Do you understand? It's just powerful. What a great gift. Some people have the gift of writing. Many people believe they do. Some have it. You've been in the classes with the teachers who are not gifted. You know what I'm saying. What I'm trying to say is, not only must you have a calling, which is a craving, a desire from God, whatever that might be, but it must serve people in the name of God. It must somehow glorify God. At the same time, the role you play must have to do with the gift you have. What's unfortunate is because sometimes we just love people so much, we let them operate in an area where they need a gift, but they don't have the gift. because we just don't want to hurt their feelings. Oh, and then beyond that, where's the training? Because even if God gifted you, you still have to be trained to use the gift. We can be educated formally. We can be educated informally by the experiences of life. Am I correct? And so sometimes it's not just the giftedness, but now it's how has that giftedness been developed by what you have been trained to do or educated to do formally, but also the education and training you've had through life itself. Where are the experiences that make this viable? And finally, where's the opportunity? Have you ever kicked a door down and gone through it because God wouldn't open it? And then you get out there and everything just falls to pieces, and you look back on the other side of that door and God's saying, when you get done out there, come back over here and I'll send you where I really want you to be. I, like many other people, I'm one of those impatient people. God, open the door now. Well, son, the door I have intended for you will open next year, or year after next, or next week. But you wait. Develop and hone the giftedness, intensify the desire, and then I will give you the opportunity to go do what needs to be done. It will arise some way, somehow. Oh, and by the way, if in the meantime I give the opportunity to somebody else, you have no right to be envious. You have no right to be jealous. I choose who does what and when. So, Joe, if I do all the things you're talking about, then I'm going to be fulfilled and happy. No, if you do all the things I'm talking about, you will have occasions of fulfillment and happiness. But you will also have occasions of extreme attack. You will have a lot of pain. You will have a lot of misery because, after all, it really is a war. And if, for example, you had the prophetic gift and you were Isaiah and you were to stand up in front of the people and say, God is going to cut you off from your homeland, I don't think you could say that with a smile unless you had something wrong with you. But it'd be the right thing to do. So, acts of religiosity. Those are easy. Let's show up at church. Let's sing. Let's listen for a while. Let's give some money. I'm fine. He said, if it's really affecting you the way it's supposed to, you cannot go through life without seeing all the need, the hungry, the naked, the oppressed. And then you have to do something with whatever your gift set is. So one of us will be teaching them, while somebody else will be feeding them, while somebody else will be clothing them. But each of us will be using our individual gifts. Together, we constitute a body. And the body was never intended, the body of Christ, was never intended just to take care of itself. That's part of it. We are to take care of each other. But there are thousands of people who have a need. To help them save their marriages, to help them learn how to work with their kids, like the class that Terry is about to do, to help the kids to don't have what they should have otherwise, like David does. Many of us in this room are doing that. I can't possibly name everybody and all the things they're doing, but I know this. As we end 2012, rather than bemoaning how bad the nation is and all the terrible things that have occurred, our job would be to find the calling, find how to serve God with it, discover our giftedness, not just by what we think we want to do, but that other people can actually affirm that is your gift. Look for the opportunities and then do what needs to be done. Will we change the world? Absolutely. But not all of it. It may be a life, a family, a community, a city or a state. But it won't happen unless we respond. God says, who will I send? Who will answer? Here am I.